It is story time with Uncle Scotty. And I am Uncle Scotty, your host for story time with Uncle Scotty. We have our own mugs. We have our own mugs. We have our own mugs. Water is great. Also great, washing our hands. Thank you to everyone who's been watching, following along, checking everything out that there is to be checked out. Most namely, all of our time together. A little bit of extra time goes a long way. Now, we have been reading Mr. Popper's Penguins. And oh my goodness, have we hit a doozy in the story. Captain Cook has been feeling very ill, has had a fever of 105 degrees, and I don't know what that's like in penguin math, but in person math, in human math, that's a bad fever. It's a bad fever. You don't want that fever. And the pro that Mr. Popper reached out to, the professional, the expert, said, maybe it's a loneliness fever. Here's another penguin. Boom. Penguin at your door. Greta. Let's find out what happens. Chapter 11. Greta. So Captain Cook did not die after all. There were 2 penguins in the refrigerator, one standing and one sitting on the nest under the ice cubes. They're as like as 2 peas, said Mrs. Popper. As 2 penguins, you mean? Yes, but which is which? At this moment, the standing penguin jumped out of the icebox, reached inside and took one of the checkers from underneath the sitting penguin, whose eyes were closed in sleep, and it laid it at Mr. Popper's feet. See, Mama, he's thanking me, said Mr. Popper, patting the penguin. At the South Pole, that's the way a penguin shows its friendship, only it uses a stone instead of a checker. This one must be Captain Cook, as he's trying to show that he's a grateful one for us for getting him Greta and saving his life. Yes, but how are we going to tell them apart? It's very confusing. I will go down in the cellar and get some white paint and paint their names on their black backs. And he opened the door to the cellar and started down, nearly tripping when Captain Cook unexpectedly tobogganed down after him. Because as we've learned, penguins love to toboggan downstairs. When he came up again, Mr. Popper had a brush and a small paint can in his hands, and the penguin had a white Captain Cook on his back. Interesting strategy, but okay. Gook, said Captain Cook, proudly showing his name to the penguin in the icebox. Goo, said the sitting penguin. Then, squirming around in her nest, she turned her back to Mr. Popper. So Mr. Popper sat down on the floor in front of the icebox while Captain Cook watched, first with one eye and then the other. Oh, because they have eyes here. So one eye and then the other. What are you going to call her? Asked Mrs. Popper. Greta. It's a nice name, said Mrs. Popper, and she seems like a nice bird, too. But the 2 of them fill the icebox, and pretty soon there will be eggs. And the next thing you know, the icebox won't be big enough for you penguins. Besides, you haven't done a thing about how I'm going to keep the food cold. I will, my love, promised Mr. Popper. It's already pretty cold for the middle of October, and it will soon be cold enough outside for Captain Cook and Greta. Because Mr. Popper said he was going to get a second icebox, but then he spent all of his money puncturing holes in the current icebox for the penguins to live. Yes, said Mrs. Popper, but if you keep them outside, they might run away. Mama, said Mr. Popper, you put your food back in the icebox tonight, and we will keep Greta and Captain Cook in the house. Captain Cook can help me move the nest into the other room. Then I will open up all the windows and leave them open, and the penguins will be comfortable. They will be comfortable, all right, said Mrs. Popper. But what about us? We can wear our winter overcoats and hats in the house, said Mr. Popper as he got up to go around and open all the windows. It certainly is colder, said Mrs. Popper, achoo, sneezing. So Mr. Popper's solution is to put all the food back into the icebox where the penguins have been living. Then now has holes in it. Let the penguins roam around the house, open up all the windows, and wear the winter coats in the house. He's definitely a penguin-centric type of guy, you know, looking out for those birds. It's kind, I suppose, but inconvenient to his family. The next few days were even colder, but the Poppers soon got used to sitting around in their overcoats. Greta and Captain Cook always occupied the chairs nearest the open windows, because they wanted to be cold. One night, quite early in November, there was a blizzard. And when the Poppers got up in the morning, there were large drifts of snow all in the house. Mrs. Popper wanted to get her broom and have Mr. Popper bring his snow shovel to clear away the drifts, but the penguins were having so much fun in the snow that Mr. Popper insisted it should be left where it was. They turned their house into a winter wonderland. In fact, he even went so far as to bring in an old garden hose up from the basement and sprinkle all the floors that night until the water was an inch deep. By the next morning, all the Popper floors were covered with smooth ice, with snow drifts around the edges near the open windows. He turned their house into the South Pole. Both Greta and Captain Cook were tremendously pleased with all that ice. Sky high, sky high. They would go up on the snowdrift at one end of the living room and run down, one behind the other, onto the ice until they were running too fast to keep their balance. Then they would flop on their stomachs and toboggan around on the slippery ice. Sounds fun. This amused Bill and Janie so much that they tried it too, on the stomachs of their overcoats. This in turn pleased the penguins greatly. Then Mr. Popper moved all the furniture in the living room to one side so the penguins and the children would have plenty of room for real sliding. It was a little hard at first to move the furniture because the feet of the chairs had frozen into the ice. Toward the afternoon, the weather got warmer and the ice began to melt. "Now, Papa," said Mrs. Popper, "you really must do something. We can't go on like this." And I think she's right. Let's see what we got here. So we have Captain Cook with his label on the back. You know it's Captain Cook because he's got it painted on there. Janie and Bill sliding around. Greta up there. The window open with the blizzard. It's a whole winter wonderland inside their house. Mr. Popper really doing his thing. "But Captain Cook and Greta are both so fat and sleek, and the children have never been so rosy." "It may be very healthy," said Mrs. Popper as she mopped up the flood, "but it's very untidy." And we know that Mrs. Popper likes to keep things tidy. "I will do something about it tomorrow," said Mr. Popper. And we'll find out what he does next time on Storytime with Uncle Scotty. Now, I just want to say, it's nice that both these penguins were cured from their illness by being together. They were just lonely. And in connecting and finding each other, they were able to overcome their environment. They could live somewhere else than the Antarctic if they needed to. They just needed each other. And that's nice, I think. A nice note to end on, perhaps. I have been your host, Uncle Scotty, for Storytime with Uncle Scotty. We have our own mugs. Don't forget to take a look at Patreon. Check us out there if you would like. And if you can subscribe to this YouTube channel or like this video, it goes a long way and it means a lot to me. That's where my heart is. And I will see you next time. Bye.